So today's guest is Kathryn. I'm really looking forward to this interview with you, Kathryn. Can you just introduce yourself to everybody?
Okay, thank you, Deborah, and hello to everyone. My name is Kathryn Whiteley. I am a feminist criminologist, which really means over the years, as part of my research agenda, I focus on women that commit violent crimes, such as homicide and/or murder, of course, sex offences as well. But I'm an Aussie and which is great. And I live in central Pennsylvania and I teach in central Pennsylvania in the United States.
Right. So what is your role in work? What do you do? Is that what you do? Are you a educator, a campaigner?
Well, I probably could be a bit of both, but I'm an educator, but also, so when I say educator, so I teach in the criminal justice or criminology, criminological realm here at the college or university here in the United States. But having said that, a big part of my life, and I will say it's like a calling for me for the last 20 years, has been going into women's maximum and medium security prisons and sitting down and not just interviewing individually one on one with women, but also having just genuine conversations that with women that are incarcerated for long to life and life without parole sentences. So I work, when I say work, it's not work for me, Deborah. I go back to saying it's a calling for me. I love that piece. And the best part about it is that I can always bring that back into the classroom as an educator as well. But I work very closely, and I usually say engage a lot with women here in the United States that are serving those life and life without parole sentences.
Yeah.
I have researched and engaged with women in the Australian prison before coming to the United States and now living here. And also, I've been to Ireland and had conversations and interviewed women inside for murder in Dublin. So I've got more to do, but I love that piece because I think what I do provide is an authentic platform for a lot of these women that don't have a voice because we do shun them because of their criminality.
Yeah. Have you ever been to UK then, Kathryn?
I have visited many times, but not inside the prison. So look out, 2025. That's my goal.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
like yourself, I've made such great friends across the pond, as we would say. So I am looking forward to, shall we say, meeting and uh, traveling through and having a little bit of a tour and chatting to some people in the women's prisons in the UK. So I can't wait to do that next
Yeah.
year.
So obviously we support victims through domestic abuse, domestic violence. Um, what sort of percentages are the women that have committed domestic homicides that are in prisons? Is it quite a large percentage?
This is interesting. So I'll take a little step back. So we understand here's, and I'll just use the United States, but a very generalized perspective. So we know that women here in the United States, the victimization accounts for 85% of women, no matter what crime or criminality that they have committed. The women that I work with are about that 10, 11 to 13% of the women. That's the percentage of the women that I work with in the bigger cohort of women that offend. So 10 to 13 is usually the violent female offenders. Now, you could say, and I'm just generalizing here because there's a little bit of fluidity here within that percentage or that smaller percentage that women that do commit um, intimate partner homicide, or, again, we could look at that. I would say that it could be the 70-75% of that smaller cohort have been abused, victimized. There is domestic or intimate partner violence there. Now, digging a little bit deeper, Deborah, is that I would, again, and I'm going out on a limb here because next year I could do some more research and find that it has shifted.
Yeah.
But I would say a larger than less amount of the proportion of women that are inside for intimate partner homicide or homicide, etc., um, a larger percentage, maybe 60-65%, were abused, and or you could claim, and I'm only saying claim, it could be in self-defense as well, or a build-up of the domestic or intimate partner violence prior to committing the crime. So, 60-65%, I would say, of the cohort that I work with have been incarcerated, or been abused and or incarcerated for that intimate partner homicide. But there are other women too that
Yeah,
did not have that smaller percentage that did, kill, and, there was no abuse.
right. But the majority, there was domestic abuse involved in the other cases.
You could say yes, Deborah, absolutely across the board, universal,
Yeah,
universalizing that. You definitely say that. What I have found, and I've shared with many others, is that where my research seems to head is that I am working with women that have been, well, that were abused. There is domestic violence or intimate partner violence, but have killed their children. So I'm working probably right now with a larger cohort of women in this group, that have, been incarcerated for the murder of a child or children. And then we can always step back and think, well, what about coercive control and the abuse that follows
yeah,
through on that pathway? So all of that, and it's, as you can appreciate, Deborah, it's very complex. And
yeah,
talking today, there's so much behind the scenes to unpack.
yeah. There is, and coercive control is the hardest um, to prove as well, isn't it? And also, the women that we deal with will hands down say it is the worst form of domestic abuse, the coercive
Yes.
control side of it. That
Yes.
it actually does make you feel like you are going crazy. Um, and I think there's a lot to be spoken about that still. There's a lot of understanding to be done. There's a lot of educating to be done on that side of things. But
Yes.
what do the women what do you just go in and speak to them and get to know them, or do you move around, or how does it work?
Well, I'd love to tell you, and I'm all of the above. I never sit still. Okay. So, over 20 years, roughly about 20 years, I've, been going inside the prisons and conducting the one-on-one interviews. And that's all I do,
Mm,
Deborah. For me, it's been a pathway of, when I say intimacy, but it's a very personal path for the woman and myself. In other words, for a woman that is incarcerated, and they're the women that I go in, to visit and or research and engage with. When you have someone said, "Hey, I'm Dr. Whiteley or Dr. Kate or whatever you wish to call me, and I'd like to write your story or I'd like to hear about your story." This cohort of women, like any woman that's incarcerated, they're very vulnerable. And of
mm,
course, they're doubly damned because they're female and also they committed a violent crime. Let's not forget about everything else. So the role I've taken upon in the last 20 years is to go in, to interview women. And I don't, Deborah, I don't do it once. I don't just go in and say, "Hey, can I give me your information? Now I'm going to go and research and be well known for my publications." Quite the opposite. What I do is connect with the women, if it's through writing first, or if there is a key person at the Department of Corrections that I can meet and greet with first and say, "This is what I'd like to do," before I submit an application to go in and interview the women. But it's a bigger picture than that, because I do go in, I talk to a woman, I'll interview her twice or 2 or 3 times. So we'll go back and forth. And then I usually, record their interviews. I was in Texas a few years ago, but they wouldn't allow me to record. So I had to handwrite some interviews, which was, a challenge, but we did it, myself and the women there. But what I like to do is take the women back if they will allow. And I don't go in and pressure them. And if they wish to, participate and then withdraw about halfway through or at the beginning, no problem. But
yeah,
what I try to do is, just like we're doing today, is having a very authentic or an authentic conversation. This is who I am, and I think it's going to be beneficial for you to share about your life, your journey prior to committing the crime? What was that like?
Mm.
Um, and I go back and I take the women back to their childhood. And again, it's how much they wish to share. So I'm not
Yeah,
pressured to having a scripted copy of these are the questions and you're going to answer these questions. Um, I think part of over the years who you become is that you understand that there are certain questions you can gently ask or navigate into the conversation, and you soon know the ones that they're going to answer and the ones they're going to not answer. But I have a conversation, some people say, in the interview with the women, and it's a one-on-one, and they talk about their childhood, their teenage years, and all of this certainly does involve trauma,
yeah,
any type of abuse, and some women will be very specific, and they'll say, well, they'll go down a pathway about it could be sexual, emotional abuse, or psychological abuse, or physical abuse by a loved one or someone that's on the exterior or the outside.
yeah,
So they talk about their pathways, and the one thing that I've always done, Deborah, is that I never give up. I don't. Again, even the women in Australia all those years ago, it was many years ago. I went and spoke to some women there. Up until a point that they were released, I would every so often reach out if I could. If it was via snail mail or something like this. Uh,
yeah,
Here in the United States, with the women that are incarcerated in Pennsylvania, and there's several there, and in Texas, I write to them. They write back. I have cards sent to me. We converse the best we can, and I do visit. And even the women in Ireland, I've been back a couple of times and been able to go back in. And even though I'm writing or have written their journey, prior to the criminality and what they endured or what they did or didn't, I still go back and have been permitted to go in and sit down and have a chat and say, I haven't forgotten about you. No matter what has been written, no matter what you have shared, I'm still around. And yeah. So
yeah.
there's a
Have
lot to
they
unpack there.
have they all committed murder?
All the women that I work with, have conversations with, all are in for murder. Some will, depending on the country, manslaughter, first degree, second degree murder, third degree murder, and sexually offending or sexual offences. Again, they're the only women that I work with, which is really sad because there's not many that wish to go down that path, because we do shun this group of women.
Yeah. Do you see any sort of pattern with any of them? Is there quite a common pattern? Would you say?
I will say yes, but that is very broad. Ethnicity, because I work with women from different, walks of life, ethnicity, socio-economic backgrounds. Some women, will say, look, it was in self-defense. It was either she or he or me, whichever, the partner. Could have been abused by a parent. And again, it was like, I couldn't take it anymore. So there's pathways, certainly, of abuse, and we do know that the ACEs or the ACE scores are usually high with women that have committed a violent crime. So the abuse, there's certainly similarities there. Uh, Rationales for why, definitely similarities there. But there are also women that are incarcerated that had a wonderful life. So the dissimilarity there is like, well, no, we weren't abused. Please don't put us in that category of being the victims. You know,
Yeah,
I'm more victimized now that I'm inside and I've been caught. You know what I mean?
yeah,
So, but there certainly trauma is there. But, you know, Deborah, because I work so close with individual women, with several hundred individual women over the 20 years, if I was to say, "Oh, you're all the same," there is a pathway, of course, of similarity, so close. But I try not to say, "Well, you're the same as Miss Smith or Miss Jones here." You know what I mean? Because I try, from my perspective, to give them a unique platform to have a voice and to share possibly some areas that it wasn't the same path that they took, or there wasn't abuse, or my education was great, but I still went on to you know to be the perpetrator as opposed to be the victim. So, oh gosh, Deborah, there's so much I can unpack. It's just, there's a lot.
yeah. No, it's really interesting. It's really, really interesting because this isn't the normal thing that we hear, is it? You know, what happens after they've been convicted. And it's really interesting to hear, to see if there is that pattern of abuse that has continued through generations, I suppose.
Yes,
Um,
and Deborah, I wanted to say, if you don't mind, I get you can see I'm so passionate about working with these women.
yes,
It
yeah,
is,
yeah,
as we all are when we love what
yeah,
we do. Um,
yes,
the I'm going to say trauma, rather than saying abuse, but the trauma continues for many of the women um, that are incarcerated, particularly here in the United States, because they're sentenced for life and life without parole. And when I hear people talk from other westernized countries, and I'm an Aussie, and now I'm also dual citizenship, but uh, sometimes when we say, "Oh, that woman is serving a life sentence," absolutely, by law, the sentencing term is life, etcetera, with parole. But here in the United States, most of the women I work with, their life without parole. And they were, sentenced for 18, 19 when they went in, or in their 20s or 30s. And they're at this moment, LWOP, never to be released. And they call that the other death sentence, that they will never. So again, when we hear about the trauma to women that have been sentenced, and of course anyone that is incarcerated, absolutely, there's experience of trauma and settling in and navigating your way, um, but think about women that have been in the system 20, 30 years, and they're never ever going to be released. And again, Deborah, I always like to say this disclaimer: I don't condone violence. I don't. Okay, but I just wanted to
yeah,
acknowledge that the trauma can continue no matter, and the victimization can continue. And something we seem to forget a little bit too is that, and I see this here in the United States, is that when I visit women in a state prison, so there's two women state prisons here in the United States. So, you've got anywhere 14, 1,500 women in the main prison that I go to, and up to maybe 150, maybe even up to 200 can be in there serving life and life without parole. So that's
mm,
a cohort that I work with. Um, what I find though is that the victimization isn't just, oh, I'm being victimized, now I'm sentenced, and it's the people around me, and life is tough, and I'm, stressed. I've never been inside before. Victimization, and I always say, share this with people, also can be neglect, not because you're inside, but more specifically because of the crime you committed, but also from loved ones outside. I don't know how many times, Deborah, that I will visit women as a visitor, not going in to do research. Say here in Pennsylvania is one example. And there are so many loving mums, sisters, aunts, grandmas, and of course, some males as well. But over the years, the longer these women stay in a prison system, oh my gosh, the less visitation they have, the less loved ones. And some of the loved ones, die, they're deceased, or
mm,
they move on. They have their families and children, and they have their own lives. But I will go out on a limb and say, when I go to male state institutions, there is a lot more women there than there are males. So when we talk about victim or victimization, and I frame that with neglect, Deborah, because a lot of the women, the loved ones move on, and but it's very ironic when you go to do different state prisons, and where a male has all these visitors and the women and the children and the females visiting, but when you go to a females prison, yeah, there's a lot of females and everyone and the children come there, but not so many men. And that's part of the victimization, and that's part of trauma for women that are inside, not even their past, but more specifically, the neglect on loved ones or people around them that don't visit or don't remain in contact.
yeah. That's interesting, isn't it? Why do you think that is?
Well, again, and I've had women that are in serving life say that, and it's the nurturing mum or woman that they are, but they will say that, well, my sons and daughters, which does happen, they're all grown now. I've been in here 20 something years or 30 years. They've got children of their own. So they've got their life to live and they can't be coming here visiting mum, whichever.
Mm.
But it's also part of that, of as we talk about femininity or the norm as being a woman, the carer, the nurturer, we don't stop. But I think there's always so many women and females and girls that visit the males. But in response, it's like there's not too many of the males that visit the females over a period of time. And I'm
Yeah.
only generalizing, Deborah, because there's some wonderful men out there that support their loved
Yeah.
females in
Yeah.
prison. So that's a generalized statement, but I see it as the years progress. But fascinating. So there's so many aspects, isn't there?
Yeah. Have you ever felt scared in there when you've
Oh
gone
gosh.
visiting?
This is a wonderful question, and I get that asked many times. When I began my research, and it was research when I started later in life, I went to do my PhD, right? Had no idea I'd end up in this realm. Anyway, I remember one of the first women I met, and it was in Australia, and it was the first time I'd met her. And again, I was pretty green then. This is going back, 20 odd years ago, but I was still pretty green then about what to anticipate. And I had my own ideas of how things would go. Um, there was one young woman, and she bent down to pick something out of a little bag or paper bag she had and hand it to me. And shame on me for that moment, because there's only always myself and the woman in the room. There's no one else ever in the room, because that's always part of my research agenda. I will not do that if
Mhm.
there's guards or officers, shall we say, in the room. She bent down to pick something up, and it was a newspaper clipping. And for a minute I thought, what's she bending down? And to this day I share it out of feeling so embarrassed and silly, but I want to share. But other than that, no, and it's not cockiness. It's not, oh, I think it just comes with time who we are. So I have not felt, oh, I'm scared. I will say I always have my wits about me, and I never know what to anticipate when I go in for the first time in different, particularly here in the United States, state prisons. They're big, they're
Yeah.
large,
Yeah.
and but no, I won't say scared, but I share with anyone that is doing or has done or considers the work that I'm doing. You always have to learn protocol. You have to observe. You have to be aware. You have to, and I won't say watch your back. I'm always careful about saying that term, but you know, but I think respect goes a long way too.
Yeah.
Uh, I think respect of people around you, not just the women, but who works in the prison system, give them the respect that they deserve as well.
Yeah. And what do you do once you've done an interview with them? What do you do then with that interview?
Okay, so there's a few things here. So I have written book chapters and scholarly research, but at this moment, I decided so basically I write their stories I publish their stories. But this year was wonderful because I thought, well, what's something different that we could do with the women to give them a platform, but not me writing their stories for them. So, as you know, this year, myself and a colleague, AJ, we produced a podcast series called Self Identities Conversations with Convicted Women. We were given permission and we had to go through all the Department of Corrections protocol, but we were given permission to go in and for me to sit down inside the state maximum security prison and have a one on one conversation with
Wow.
10 women that are serving life and life without parole. And would you believe, which is wonderful, and I'm glad we're talking today, because in January, we have another series of another 10 women in the same state prison here in Pennsylvania in the United States. And we have 10 more women. And three out of that 10 women, when it's released in January, starting in January,
Mm.
were sentenced and were on death row. So I talk to them individually about what was death row like. And again, they tell me what they wish. And then they talk about now being what we would say in general population. So they appealed and they won general population, but they had been on death row here in Pennsylvania. So it's fascinating because Deborah, my goal is that I use my ability for these women to be educators. I think that's how I can frame it. Not, Dr. Whiteley or Kate or Kathryn, out there publishing their stories. I I always see that I'm this middle person that gives them the platform to talk about who they were, because we forget they're our sisters, they're our mothers, they're our nieces, our grandmothers. Any of them could be inside one day.
Yeah. And have you ever sort of thought this woman should not be in here? I
Yes, I
would
have.
imagine I would imagine you have quite a few times, haven't you? Or is that
Well, Deborah, there have been women that over the 20 years they're inside for a murder, or that I've thought either shouldn't be there, definitely, but depending on the criminal justice system, because here in the United States, it's a different criminal justice system than in the UK and Australia
yeah,
and New Zealand, etc., and in Canada as well. There are times I have thought, yes, that woman possibly in another country would not be incarcerated, or yes, that woman may or should have spent some time, but certainly not 20 or 30 years, or should be released by now. And overall, I would say from my experience of 20 years, many of these women, if they had committed the crime they did in other countries, they would be released today.
yeah,
But I don't share that with the women. I think that's the biggest thing, Deborah, is that no matter, and people ask me this, well, how do you feel? It, you know, if I feel sympathy, I keep that to myself. I have great empathy, and that's what I acknowledge with the women.
yeah. And do you think that some of them are innocent? Have you
I
come
would
across any that you thought this woman is innocent and should not be here?
Well, we could argue that, what about a woman that's in self-defense? If it was, yeah, we're here in the United States. Overall, many women that we could argue if it was in Australia or in the UK, that was in self-defense. Yes, there should be some, the woman should be, shall we say, have to work through the process, and some punishment should be provided, but not incarceration. So I have met women that I believe should be incarcerated, but possibly not for the length of time they are. I have met women that, yes, I would agree that shouldn't be incarcerated, or I have met women that will say, till the very end, uh, I'm still innocent. I've been here 20, 30 years, whichever, and I'm still innocent. And there is a very, very small percentage of those women that I would say, from a criminality perspective, they probably did do the crime, even though
Yeah,
they say they're innocent. But again, I'm only doing just a very blanket perspective here, not individual women, because um, I really love what I do, Deborah, and I really love working closely with the women. So I
yeah.
don't want to call them out or this or that, you know.
Well, at the moment we've got 16 days of activism for violence against women and girls in
Yes.
UK, and I'm very passionate about what we at Resolute do, and we fight for real changes every day. Because ultimately the system is failing domestic abuse victims, and the things that we see on a daily basis where they are being failed by um, services and police, it is just shocking. And it is a global issue, isn't it? Violence against women and girls is a global issue.
It is.
But we've got it as a national crisis at the moment.
Mhm,
But we have recorded, on our stats are that there's 2 to 3 women murdered every week in the UK,
mhm.
and they think that the reason I say they think is because I think statistics are only a guide, aren't they? We're never going to get the true reality of what some suicides are, what some murders are. But they're saying that there's double the amount of suicides that there is to murder, and I can believe that, but can also believe that there's a lot more than what we do know, due to
Yes.
coercive controlling behaviour and domestic abuse that has been perpetrated on victims. And that cuts really deep with me, because I think when women are in such a situation where they have been coercively controlled to the point where, and I get it because I've been there myself, and to the point where they just can't see any way out or any way forward to get out of that situation. Do you think that some of these women have been in that situation where they've seen no other way out than to commit that crime?
Absolutely, absolutely, more than less. And unfortunately, here in the United States, that could, again, if you kill someone, and for us stepping back, just generally, okay,
Yeah,
well, that was like, that person endured intimate partner violence or domestic abuse, depending on who it was and the situation. We can always step back and say they shouldn't be incarcerated. Well, in other words, it was going to be her life as opposed to the person that she had killed. So what
yeah,
is it to be? Um, Absolutely, we have so much. I think it goes back again, Deborah, to our sentencing. We do have the harsh sentencing. And that's where sometimes, not sometimes, that's where here in the United States, we have so much more to acknowledge about coercive control, about the abuse and the impact of that abuse on the female, and hence why the crime was committed.
yeah,
So, I do believe we don't focus on that enough, because no matter what, overall, a majority of the time, that woman will be sentenced, but it might be 10 or 12 years. But still, that's 10 or 12 years because it was either my life or that perpetrator's or that victim's life. And I chose mine in return, to keep alive. So the sentencing here, we have a long way to go. We are working on that. And I'm not going to say it's a blanket that we've got the worst, but we have so much more to do here in the United States regarding acknowledging the length of sentencing for women, and or anyone that suffers abuse.
yeah,
But we have a long way to go, and I really, kudos to you and your colleagues for always bringing this to the forefront of what we need to acknowledge,
yeah.
within the
I think,
activism role.
yeah, I do think that we need to keep. It is a massive global issue.
Yes,
You
yes,
know,
it is.
it's not like we're isolated in UK to any of this. It is global, isn't it? And
Yes,
I think that the more women that keep having the voices heard, the more chance that we do have of being listened to.
yes.
Um, because we are overlooked, aren't we?
W-
You know, we
We
are.
we are, and Deborah, and I think that's the one piece when all those years ago when I decided, okay, this is the realm I'm going to work in, and doing a PhD and so forth, where it all began. I mean, I had no idea I'd end up in the United States and follow this through. You know what I mean? It happens.
Yeah,
But again, in hindsight, I look at how far I've come to provide this cohort of women that really we can get out there and we can talk about abuse, etc., etc., but they really can't. So I'm really thrilled but humbled and grateful to be able to give these women, many that were victim and or now the perpetrator, a chance, and hopefully as part of the bigger picture, not just here in the United States but globally, we'll think, well, those women inside that did kill, that were abused to some degree in self-defense, whatever it may have been, we should listen. And that's
mm,
always been my goal. Let's listen to the women as educators, again, not condoning what women have done with the cohort that I work with. However, you know, I say this, Deborah, with grace. I don't know if I was in. I have never been um, in their shoes. Who am I to
Yeah.
say this or that? I wouldn't know how I would react if there was abuse in my life to what some of these women have shared. And as they've said, it was either me or the victim. What am I going
Yeah.
to do? You know,
Yeah.
so it's
And
very, very real.
I think you'd have to experience the torment and the cruelty every second or every day to be able to even try and get your head round how a woman could retaliate in that way, because like you, we don't condone violence at all.
No, no.
Um, but saying that, having experienced that, I can kind of put myself in that situation. Uh, Not that I'd want to go, but I think that I can see why. I can see
Mhm,
how.
mhm,
Um, because ultimately you have been gaslit, you have been brainwashed, you are not the person that you walked into that relationship as.
mhm,
And you are not mentally in in a fit state to make conscious decisions in some cases
mhm,
with extreme coercive control.
mhm,
I can understand how it does happen. Um, we've had there's quite have you heard of David Challen over in UK, where his mum he fought for his mum, didn't he, where she was actually released from
mhm,
prison, and she suffered many years of coercive control, domestic abuse.
mhm.
And that was quite a landmark in the UK because it had never been known. Um, and I'd love to be able to have a conversation with him and be able to speak to him, because I know the Centre of Women's Justice was involved as well within that case. And I think I'd love to hear how the jury, how their mindset changed in a way that they could try
Mhm,
to understand how that how that got to a situation where it was murder.
mhm,
Um, so yeah, I can see why it does happen. I can
mhm,
see why it does happen in self defense as well,
mhm,
because I would say in a lot of cases, in the majority of cases, there'll have been other incidents where there's been physical violence before that woman has actually
mhm,
retaliated back to
mhm,
defend herself.
mhm.
Um, I think that in a lot of cases, women can only take so much, and it's that snap, isn't it?
Yes.
Um, and
Do you know?
they have the capacity to be able to think rationally when they've been abused so badly. They
Mhm,
haven't got that capacity there.
mhm. Deborah, and again, the topics I talk about, they aren't the most nicest, but working with female sex offenders, and they are serving, 15, 10, 15, bit longer, whichever, here in the United States. And we, again, when we talk about the hierarchy deemed in the prison system, the worst of the worst when it's their children, right?
Mm,
When you hear women, and we talk about abuse, uh, that a father, or a person, well, I'll share this example. One woman had shared with me that when I was talking to her and interviewing her, and I found Deborah. So it's just the one-on-one. This, as I've said earlier on, just myself sitting across the table and recording and handwriting
yeah,
for the interviews. Anyway, and she had said all along, it was like, because I'm one of these. I'm not perfect, but I like the eye contact if I'm talking to someone. And I couldn't for nearly an hour or so. She just kept looking down. I mean, I was trying to gently engage, with her, because again, it's her space, it's her place, not mine. And then finally I had the courage, I suppose, or I didn't want to disrespect her, and I asked her. I said, "Why is it? Could I just ask? I note that you, when we're talking, you don't look at me, or you can't, And it was just a general question." And she said, and she's incarcerated for sexual offending with a co-accomplice, but she said, "I used to be raped by my father. And my father would hold me down and make me look in his eyes as he raped me. And this was why she could not look her." And it just, those are one of those moments. And I have many of those, Deborah, but it's like
Mm.
you sit back, you don't know what to say. And when we talk about, coercive control, and we talk about, so prior to her being or committing many years ago the crime she did with with her husband, male co-accomplice, part of her pathway, and we talk about this with violence, let's not forget what happened with the families. In this instance, did her father doing what he did, was that trauma that she took with it, did that impact and did that play into um, her overall criminality
Mm.
with allowing her children to be abused and being the co-accomplice of that? So that, to me, number one, was very powerful, and it shook me. I sat there. I had no idea what to say.
Mm.
um, of course, I probably not probably I did want to just like tear up a little, but we kept going with the conversation. But that was because she couldn't give me eye contact. Now, again, years later, through that ongoing abuse, she became the abuser. So we've there's a lot to unpack, as I said, Deborah, what I
Yeah,
do, and I get into very much the theories behind that. But I just wanted to share that's something we shouldn't forget either. You know, yeah, there's things that happen closer to home where
yeah,
we'd least expect with the abuse, but it was her
yeah,
father, and then she became, as we say, the victim and perpetrator. But that was abused by her father. That was
yeah,
something that got to my heart. But
yeah, yeah. It must have done. It's a lot of professionals don't understand how trauma works, do they? That's what
yeah,
we tend to find. It is very, very complex. Um, and I think there needs to be a lot more education around the impact of that, because I think if you dig deeper, a lot of it does stem from childhood traumas, doesn't it?
yes, 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 it does. And we share about adverse childhood experiences, the ACEs, women here, and even female sexual offenders. If I was to put a cohort of women incarcerated for murder, and the same with female sex offenders, again with children, that their victims were children, I I will go out on a limb and say literally the ACE scores, very, very high for both. So
Yeah,
there is that. Yeah, it's a complex realm, and I really, Deborah, I just hope people will take the time and not dismiss this cohort or the group of women incarcerated for life and life without parole or long termers. If you get the chance to hear their stories, and again, it's not to pity them, and many of them don't want pity. They've been victims. They've been victimized before they came in, as I've just mentioned one lady in particular. But many of them I've found over the years, no, we don't want to, we want to empower ourselves. So can you help us? You giving us a platform to have a voice. We hope that someone will realize or learn more about us as opposed to the crime or the criminality. And
yeah.
and in that understanding is about their victimization or having a voice, owning, having some agency. And I think that's what I try to provide a little bit for the women as well.
Yeah, and how would we find those podcasts, Catherine?
Well, again, if you just, it's across the board on any podcast, shall we say, platform. It's called Self Identities Conversations with Convicted Women. And again, we have 10 women already. Episodes out there. We have another 10 coming in January, and I can also send you my information as well.
Yeah,
Um, and something, just again, Deborah, something I did a few years ago outside the norm, produced a documentary, and it's an educational documentary. It's called Until We Have Faces, Women Serving Life. And it goes nearly 40 minutes, but it's on YouTube. Until We
Mm.
Have Faces, Women Serving Life. And again, I go in with another colleague and we speak, we listen to the women. And there is abuse. They talk about childhood abuse. It is really intense, but we were privy to go in and have women talk about their upbringing and talk about what they went through. And now they're serving life and life without parole. It's very powerful because it's called Until We Have Faces because we were not permitted to show the women's faces.
Right.
So we were limited, but we were allowed inside this state prison in Pennsylvania to walk around. But if you closed your eyes, that's what's key, Deborah, and listen to the women talk. One woman there, and their real names are used. She talked about she thought it was normal for every little child to be abused regularly. She thought that was a norm until
Mm.
she grew up, and now she's inside for murder. So it's a powerful when you don't even have to look at what some of the scenery is. It's not much scenery, but it's it's powerful. So that again gives these women a platform to talk about what they
Yeah.
endured.
Yeah. I'll definitely be looking that up. Definitely.
Thank
I
you.
just I just want to say thank you so much, Kathryn, for your time. It's been lovely to meet you.
Oh, Deborah. It could I say it was lovely when we connected. Um, Please keep up the wonderful work that you and your colleagues and your friends do over there. And for sure, look out. I'm coming to see you in 2025. Okay.
I look forward to it.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so
You
much.
thank you for everything, Kathryn. Keep up doing you keep working on so hard and just keep going, and we've just got to keep highlighting these issues and yeah, just keep going.
I
God
will
bless you.
certainly do. You too. Blessings. Cheers. Bye bye.
See you later, Kathryn. Bye.